This is sample 12. We call it clip, notch, and understitch. Very easy with these two pattern pieces that are in your syllabus. So the large piece says cut 1 of fabric, so there's that one. The smaller piece says cut 1 of fabric, so there's fabric. Then pay attention, it says cut 1 of sew-in interfacing, and you'll be given a piece of interfacing that's the a big enough piece to cut this out. So you'll have 2 of this pattern and 1 of this pattern. The first step is to sew the interfacing. Because it's sew on, it's going to go to the fashion fabric, and at this point it doesn't matter which side. And if this were a real article of clothing and this needed to be stay stitched, you can double that up by attaching the interfacing to your fashion piece and calling the line of stitching here stay stitching. But because we're going to trim this out later, instead of stay stitching at 1/2 of an inch, we're going to stay stitch at 1/4 of an inch. So bring this over to the machine. And you should know by now, but in case you've missed this part, this tiny, tiny little mark right in front of the feed dog hole is a 1/4 inch mark. It's not the edge of your presser foot, because the presser foot is actually wider than a 1/4 inch. So keep the edge of your fabric lined up against that 1/4 inch mark. And sew this, following the curve. Drop down a little bit, that's okay. It's going to get trimmed out later. You don't need to back stitch because nothing's going to go anywhere on here, but do clip these threads off. And you might also notice that I previously serged the bottom of this just because it was easier to do it while it was off and not attached to this yet. So that was just my choice. If I hadn't done that, it wouldn't have been that big of a deal to take this over to the serger and go ahead and get that bottom edge finished. If you don't have a serger, you just fold it up once and do a clean finish along that bottom edge. All right, so the next step is to sew the facing to the fashion piece. So this is the facing piece, and it now right sides together. Since I put my interfacing on this side, I have made this the back side, and this is now my fashion side, or my right side of my fabric. So right sides together, put your facing on top of the fashion piece, and go ahead. Now this time it will be sewn at the full 5/8. And go ahead and do a little back stitch there. I'll follow that line again, only this time I have a 5/8 inch seam allowance. Back stitch. Now, this might seem kind of silly that I just sewed this on and then I cut it right off again, but you're doing a sample. And so for our sample, we have no seams. This wouldn't be like the front and then the back, so there'd be a shoulder seam here or something like that. You're just doing a tiny little piece of an entire edge. So in real life, on a real project, you'd have other steps before you get to this next step, which is trim this down. So I'm going to trim the seam allowance, and this is wide to the world. So that means that the longest seam allowance is going to be left at 3/8 of an inch. My clever little stitching right here has already told me what that is. I'm going to get the seam gauge out and show you this. So my entire seam allowance is 5/8 of an inch. 3/8 of an inch, 1, 2, 3, is that line where I just sewed my interfacing to my fashion piece. So the longest one I'm going to leave is 3/8 of an inch. So I don't even need my ruler, I just follow that line right there. And basically I cut just along the inside and cut that whole 1/4 of an inch off. Like I say, why did you sew it on if you're just going to sew it off? It's in a real project, there are several steps in between doing this. So that's why. Okay, so the longest one, which is my fashion fabric, it needs to be left at 3/8 of an inch. So that one stays just what it is. Interfacing is always, no matter where, cut down to the nubbins, just as down, right down to the seam line. So possibly like 1/8 of an inch. So I'm just going to go ahead and hold my scissors and get this cut off. All right, so my inner facing went down to less than 1/8 of an inch, as long as it's still sewn in there. My fashion fabric is 3/8 of an inch, and that leaves my facing here on the back side to be 1/4 of an inch. So 1/4 of an inch is 1/8 of an inch less than 3/8, so I'm basically cutting off 1/8 of an inch. So if you know about how big 1/8 of an inch is, you can just eyeball that down. The critical piece is that they stair step down. None of them end at the exact same place. That way, when this seam is enclosed all the way around, when this flips over to the right side, I don't have a bulk right here. The seams inside aren't all stopping at the exact same place. There's a beveling going on. So my facing is at 1/4 of an inch, my fashion fabric is at 3/8 of an inch, my inner facing back there is at 1/8 of an inch. Now to get this to bevel, or to fold down and be nice and flat, and I'm on a curve right here, I have to do a couple of things in the pressing. So let's go over to the iron. Another thing I haven't done, because I'm not downstairs where the sergers are right now, is I need to hem my facing piece right here, and you can do that either with the serger, or I guess I could clean finish it right like this and get a nice edge on the bottom of the facing. But since I'm not done in the lab right now and I don't have access to that, we'll pretend that that's done. Okay, I have an inside curve and an outside curve. So my inside curves get clipped. So I'll take the facing, my 1/4 inch one, and put a clip like every 1/2 inch or so. Just go right to that stitch line. And then wherever those clips are, you stagger. So on the back side, I'm going to go between those clips. So there's the 2 clips on the fashion fabric, and clip the fashion fabric, but not in the exact same place that I clipped the facings. Okay, so that's the inside curve. So that when they fan out, they're in different places. Okay, on an outside curve, I need to put in a notch. So a notch is a pie-shaped little piece of fabric. I'll just cut out little wedges here. And the more, what's the word, steep or rounded that outside curve is how close I put these notches together. This is a very gentle curve. I'm not going to need them to be super close to each other. And then the same thing on the facing side is wherever the notch is on the fashion fabric, I'll stagger and put the notch in between them so that they're never in the same place. And what that's doing is preserving the integrity of my stitch line. If they were in the exact same place, I've created a weak spot. And under stress, that's where those stitches would pop. And I don't want them to do that, so I keep them separate. Okay, now I need to press the seam open, which is kind of a trick because it's curvy. I can't just put this down flat on here. It's not going to lay flat. So I use my point presser is one thing to do. And see, if I just give this a little bit of stress, it will lay down flat now. Then I can finger that and find the middle again and press right on top of my point presser. That works for this part pretty good, but it's not going to work so well on that outside curve. My inside curve I can get to lay down flat because of those clips. See how they opened up so that it would lay nice and flat? It's not going to happen up here. So for that one, a sleeve roll would have been a little better, but I have a ham, so we'll use the ham instead. So I find a curved place on the ham, and again stress that over it. So here's it coming around the corner right here. If I open this seam up and then touch that with the iron, you'll be able to still see this without blocking the view too much. Too bad. You're just going to have to deal with what you can see here. Okay. And I'll show you another little trick if this really is giving you fits and you can't get to this so good. Okay. Actually, that's not too bad. I got that to stay open pretty good. The other thing that you can do is to leave it flat like this, and then you press one side down, totally down, flip it over, and bring the other side down. If it was a real severe giant curve right there, let me see if I can maybe get this so you can see it from this side. That's what I would do. Get this to come down. Anyway, so that seam now has been pretty much flattened and opened all the way. What I don't want is if I hadn't pressed that first, when I go to flip it around the other direction, and if I didn't fuss with it and get the seam out, and I just pressed it flat, then it doesn't come all the way. So if I just press that, you can see that there's that gap. That's called a seam well, and we don't want that. It's not a well like a happy well. It's a bad thing, so I don't want that space down in there. This needs to be totally out to the edge. So pull that. Hello, I can edit that out. Okay, so now my seam is nice and flat and out, and the next thing is called the understitch. Understitching is taking all the seam allowances and sewing them to the facing. So this little piece is the facing, and this is my fashion piece. So I want everything on my facing side. Now that you've got this pressed open, and so it's flat, it didn't make any of those seam wells, everything has to be pressed towards the facing side. So just hold that open, and see if I can give you a good angle here, and press all the seam allowance up to the facing side. So let's see if I can get that to go up there nicely. So you press it like you sewed it first. Oh, I should have done that first. So you press it flat first, then open, then towards the facing. Just that little piece right there. Little guy, come on. Okay, so now the seam allowances are all pointing towards the facing side. Now we can go to the machine. So here we are at the machine, and again we're pushing all the seam allowances towards the facing side, and just put it down initially so it's that way. Some people use the number 5 foot for this step, and you're welcome to do that. Personally, I don't like how the 5 blocks my view, and so I like to just keep my regular foot on. So the groove that's right there etched to the middle of your stitch presser foot right there, keep it lined up with the seam. And you can see I've done mine, so I have 2 different colors. Make it easier for you to see. Yours obviously will be the same color. Well, maybe not, but it should be. And I don't want to sew along the seam. I want to sew on the fabric, on the facing side. So the needle position, move that over 3 little marks, and keep the foot centered. The needle will automatically go on the facing side if you move needle position. Okay, and hang on to my thread so they don't jam. You don't need to back stitch because this is up inside on the back, and it's okay. So just keep it taut, kind of always holding, kind of push it, everything's over, and then double check. See right there, that flipped over, and I didn't want that. So make sure that your seams are always going towards the facing side. And hold this open. and your eyes are watching that groove that you're right on the seam. As you get to the curved part, you have to go a little ways and then check that again, reposition, open that seam out. And do this with needle down position, so every time it stops, needle's down, then it won't give a wonky line wherever you start and stop. Needle back up. Notice I didn't back stitch, you don't need to do that. And I've got a row of stitching that's just inside on my facing side, and it's holding all my seam allowances flat into this side. So there's one more pressing left to do. The last step on getting this done is what's called favoring the edge. If I press this so that the seam was riding exactly at the top, there's the chance that I might see the other fabric right there, and I don't ever want to see my facing. I just want it to be a nice clean fold. So we favor the edge. What that means is that the fashion fabric slightly curls back onto the wrong side, and by understitching it actually encourages the fabric to do just that. So let me press this down, you'll see. So on this side, put this white paper up, you can see against it. On this side, you see that tiny little sliver of green, which is my fashion fabric, is actually showing on the wrong side. And if I turn this over, this would be the side of the clothes, like a neck edge or a front edge where the buttons and buttonholes would be, that you can't see any of the facing peeking out from behind or the blue. So that is sample 12. Ta-da!